Deep in the valleys, 16 kilometers down a sheer drop from the village, lies a dense riverbank. This rugged terrain holds something incredibly valuable to the local artisans: beds of gray and red clay. For a young girl named Scintilla, the tap-tap of a spatula striking wet earth was music, but her mother heard only a grueling toll. Every batch of pots required carrying heavy loads up steep hills, leaving her with chronic backaches and utter exhaustion. Because of that pain, Arenla refused to teach her daughter the craft. She saw pottery as a trade that yielded a pittance, just a few rupees for months of hard labor. Her choice was driven by a harsh economic reality and a desire to keep her child safe from a lifetime of physical wear. Arenla had a different path in mind: weaving. It was a clean, indoor task that could be done in any season, and it brought in significantly more money. She wanted Scintilla at the loom, not covered in river mud. But Scintilla displayed a total lack of interest toward the threads and patterns of weaving. Whenever her parents left, she sneaked away to watch the village potters instead, memorizing the way they pushed their hands into the clay. Eventually, the village elders noticed this divide and summoned Scintilla's father. They handed down a strict decree. Skills like pot-making symbolize the history of the people. They do not belong to an individual to hoard, and an expert is obligated to pass their knowledge on. The elders framed the craft as a collective inheritance. Preserving it meant someone had to physically shoulder the work, a communal burden that effectively overruled a mother's instinct to protect her daughter from suffering. Following the council's orders, they went to the riverbank. The work began with a heavy iron blade called a dowel, requiring violent physical force to gouge the clay. Back at the shed, the raw material was stuffed into cylinders and relentlessly pounded into submission. Scintilla turned the rugged clay into a malleable dough, meaning it could be shaped without cracking. But when she tried to actually form a pot, her hands were so tense she couldn't properly hold the lump. Dropping the misshapen dough in frustration, Scintilla was approached by Anala, a village caretaker. While Scintilla's mother sat silently in the corner, Anala stepped in, showing the young girl exactly how to manage her grip to shape the delicate mouth of the pot. Passion alone couldn't form the rim. Scintilla needed specific guidance to overcome her tension, showing that mastering a heritage craft requires the wider community to share the burden of teaching when the family cannot. Success didn't come instantly. Scintilla spent weeks observing her mother's hands, watching the exact moment the rhythm slackened to fashion the rim. During the next session, Arenla feigned exhaustion and left the shed, leaving Scintilla entirely alone with the clay. Alone in the quiet, the tension finally left Scintilla's muscles. She applied Onula's instructions on the grip and her mother's technique for the rim, her hands moving deftly as the months of silent observation finally translated into physical coordination. The rhythm took over. Scintilla hit a surge of momentum, her hands blurring as she shaped pot after perfect pot, the months of frustration giving way to the speed she had watched in her mother's hands. She continued this pace until the entire batch was finished. Looking down at her work, she realized her tally was exactly one pot short of her mother's usual output. She had pushed past the friction of learning. Her persistence had finally locked into muscle memory, turning a grueling physical struggle into an effortless flow. Exhausted but triumphant, Scintilla walked up to the house to join her mother for lunch. But as she stepped through the door, she found Arenella lying lifeless on the floor. The villagers rushed to help, but it was too late. Scintilla broke down in crushing guilt, crying out to her mother's body, terrified that her success had somehow come at her mother's expense. The transfer of the craft was complete, but it carried a brutal cost. The physical toll of the work claimed the mother at the exact moment the daughter's skill reached its peak. After the village gathered to mourn, Onula walked back alone. Her intuition drew her toward the workshed, where she noticed the heavy door left slightly ajar. Inside, she found two indistinguishable batches of smooth, moist clay pots. Onula stood there for a long time, looking from one row to the other. She couldn't find a single variation in the clay, not a thumbprint or a curve that distinguished the novice from the veteran. Looking at the two symmetrical rows, it was impossible to tell where the mother's work ended and the daughter's began. The visual boundary between the generations had vanished. The pots didn't belong to any one person anymore. They were the result of a silent handoff, where the mother's years of labor and the daughter's persistence ended in the exact same shape.